escape observation. This, as I felt at the time, was leaving my own curiosity free to torment me for 24 mortal hours. But what other choice had I? It was as good as giving up being the mistress of Thorpe Ambrose altogether, to come to a private understanding with Midwinter in the sight and possibly in the hearing of Armadale's spy. Finding an old letter of yours in my pocket, I drew back into the lane, and wrote on the blank leaf with a little pencil that hangs at my watch chain. I must and will speak to you. It is impossible tonight, but be in the street tomorrow at this time, and leave me afterward forever if you like. When you have read this, overtake me, and say as you pass, without stopping or looking round, 'Yes, I promise.'" I folded up the paper and came on him suddenly from behind. As he started and turned round, I put the note into his hand, pressed his hand, and passed on. Before I had taken 10 steps I heard him behind me. I can't say he didn't look round. I saw his big black eyes, bright and glittering in the dusk, devour me from head to foot in a moment. But otherwise he did what I told him. "I can deny you nothing," he whispered. "I promise." I couldn't help thinking at the time how that brute and booby, Armadale, would have spoiled everything in the same situation. I tried hard all night to think of a way of making our interview of the next evening safe from discovery, and tried in vain. Even as early as this I began to feel as if Midwinter's letter had in some unaccountable manner stupefied me. Monday morning made matters worse. News came from my faithful ally, Mr. Bashwood, that Miss Milroy and Armadale had met and become friends again. You may fancy the state I was in. An hour or two later there came more news from Mr. Bashwood. Good news this time. The mischievous idiot at Thorpe Ambrose had shown sense enough at last to be ashamed of himself. He had decided on withdrawing the spy that very day, and he and his lawyer had quarrelled in consequence. So here was the obstacle which I was too stupid to remove for myself, obligingly removed for me. No more need to fret about the coming interview with Midwinter, and plenty of time to consider my next proceedings, now that Miss Milroy and her precious swain had come together again. Would you believe it, the letter, or the man himself, I don't know which, had taken such a hold on me, that though I tried and tried, I could think of nothing else. And this when I had every reason to fear that Miss Milroy was in a fair way of changing her name to Armadale, and when I knew that my heavy debt of obligation to her was not paid yet. Was there ever such perversity? I can't account for it, can you? The dusk of the evening came at last. I looked out of the window, and there he was. I joined him at once, the people of the house, as before, being too much absorbed in their eating and drinking to notice anything else. "We mustn't be seen together here," I whispered. "I must go on first, and you must follow me." He said nothing in the way of reply. What was going on in his mind I can't pretend to guess, but after coming to his appointment he actually hung back as if he was half inclined to go away again. "You look as if you were afraid of me," I said. "I am afraid of you," he answered, "of you and of myself." It was not encouraging. It was not complimentary. But I was in such a frenzy of curiosity by this time that if he had been ruder still I should have taken no notice of it. I led the way a few steps toward the new buildings, and stopped and looked round after him. "Must I ask it of you as a favour," I said, "after your giving me your promise, and after such a letter as you have written to me?" Something suddenly changed him. He was at my side in an instant. "I beg your pardon, Miss Gwilt. Lead the way where you please." He dropped back a little after that answer, and I heard him say to himself, "What is to be will be. What have I to do with it, and what has she?" It could hardly have been the words, for I didn't understand them. It must have been the tone he spoke in, I suppose, that made me feel a momentary tremor. I was half inclined, without the ghost of a reason for it, to wish him good night and go in again. Not much like me, you will say. Not much indeed. It didn't last a moment. Your darling Lydia soon came to her senses again. I led the way toward the unfinished cottages and the country beyond. It would have been much more to my taste to have had him into the house and have talked to him in the light of the candles. But I had risked it once already, and in this scandal-mongering place, and in my critical position, I was afraid to risk it again. The garden was not to be thought of either, for the landlord smokes his pipe there after supper. There was no alternative but to take him away from the town. From time to time I looked back as I went on. There he was, always at the same distance, dim and ghost-like in the dusk, silently following me. I must leave off for a little while. The church bells have broken out, and the jangling of them drives me mad. In these days, when we have all got watches and clocks, why are bells wanted to remind us when the service begins? We don't require to be rung into the theatre. How excessively discreditable to the clergy to be obliged to ring us into the church! They have rung the congregation in at last, and I can take up my pen and go on again. I was in a little doubt where to lead him to. The high road was on one side of me, but empty as it looked, somebody might be passing when we least expected it. The other way was through the coppice. I led him through the coppice. At the outskirts of the trees, on the other side, there was a dip in the ground with some felled timber lying on it, and a little pool beyond, still and white and shining in the twilight. The long grazing grounds rose over its further shore, with the mist thickening on them, and a dim black line far away of cattle in slow procession going home. There wasn't a living creature near. There wasn't a sound to be heard. I sat down on one of the felled trees and looked back for him. "Come," I said softly. "Come and sit by me here." Why am I so particular about all this? I hardly know. The place made an unaccountably vivid impression on me, and I can't help writing about it. If I end badly, suppose we say on the scaffold, I believe the last thing I shall see, before the hangman pulls the drop, will be the little shining pool, and the long misty grazing grounds, and the cattle winding dimly home in the thickening night. Don't be alarmed, you worthy creature. My fancies play me strange tricks sometimes, and there is a little of last night's laudanum, I dare say, in this part of my letter. He came, in the strangest silent way, like a man walking in his sleep. He came and sat down by me. Either the night was very close, or I was by this time literally in a fever. I couldn't bear my bonnet on. I couldn't bear my gloves. The want to look at him and see what his singular silence meant, and the impossibility of doing it in the darkening light, irritated my nerves, till I thought I should have screamed. I took his hand, to try if that would help me. It was burning hot, and it closed instantly on mine. You know how. Silence after that was not to be thought of. The one safe way was to begin talking to him at once. "Don't despise me," I said. "I am obliged to bring you to this lonely place. I should lose my character if we were seen together." I waited a little. His hand warned me once more not to let the silence continue. I determined to make him speak to me this time. "You have interested me and frightened me," I went on. "You have